there's something you don't see every day.
Tried to think of the most harmless thing. Something I loved from my childhood.
Throughout the many RetroBlasting videos, I've often made mention of the limbo I found myself in as a kid around 1985, when Kenner wound down the Star Wars toy line. I was a ship without a harbor. New toys would capture my interest, but not for long. I tried Voltron, I tried Transformers, I made my first real attempt to get invested in G.I. Joe, I tried Mask. All of these were super popular at the time. The toys were very cool. I liked some more than others, but none enough that they were able to supplant Star Wars. Looking back, the one thing they had in common that they did not share with Star Wars was their genesis in a TV cartoon rather than a big, exciting live-action movie. And in 1984 and 1985, as these toy lines were really gaining steam, there were two movies at the theater that captured my imagination that did not have any toys at all: Ghostbusters and Back to the Future. I've heard it from people many times who suffer false memory. They swear up and down that there were Ghostbusters toys based on the original film that came out in toy stores in 1984. That is not true. The confusion stems from the fact that some of the real Ghostbusters toys carry a 1984 copyright stamp, but this is merely a copyright date for the intellectual property rights of Ghostbusters as a whole. A copyright year is not always evidence of a year of release. Buy a Blu-ray of Ghostbusters today and it still has a copyright stamp of 1984 on it. Are you going to tell me this Blu-ray was actually made in 1984, over 22 years before the first Blu-ray players were available? We both know it wasn't. A memory is only as good as the research done to validate that memory. My memory is one of frustration as a child that there were no Ghostbusters toys in 1984. 2 years later, 1986, the cartoon series The Real Ghostbusters would launch, and with it the Kenner toy line based on the cartoon. That's 1986, not 1984. And I was there to buy those figures, but I was always a little annoyed that there were no movie-based figures to enjoy, which would have been my preference. The people who claim ardently that Ghostbusters toys were made in 1984 for the original film never have any of them to show you. It's always an anecdotal excuse: my mom threw them away, and another kid had them, and I saw them once. The fact that grown men in their 30s and 40s are still spinning the same dumb lies they did on the playground in the 1980s is pathetic. These are the same kids that had a girlfriend in Canada.
I'm sorry, I'm just not getting any reading.
Where are these toys? Why aren't there any photos of them on the internet? Why are the only photos held up as evidence always real Ghostbusters toys, ignorantly mistaken as 1984 movie toys simply because of a copyright stamp, even when they don't look anything like the movie content? When I can go on eBay year after year and find action figures from the mid-1980s based on the film Over the Top, but I have never found a single figure or toy from 1984 based on Ghostbusters, and I remember my childhood annoyance at this fact, the claims that I am wrong are not only discredited, they are the product of a needlessly obstinate mind. And don't throw in that Back to the Future had toys. Back to the Future Part 2 had some toys, but the original film didn't have jack. If either of these films had made toys, you can bet your bottom dollar I'd have sought them out. And that means I'd still have them today, because I still have 90% of my childhood toys, and I definitely would have kept toys from those two films. I still have my Ghostbusters sticker book and cassette soundtrack. These were the only two Ghostbusters items I could find in 1984, evidence of the dearth of toys based on the original film the year of release. If there had been toys for Ghostbusters in 1984, I might never have bought a single Transformer or Voltron. Such a thing would have truly changed my past. Anyway, back in the 1980s, there was another toy line I would see every time I was in a toy store: Playmobil. It was always in the same aisle as Lego, but unlike Lego, I never really knew any kids who had Playmobil toys. They looked interesting, but not enough to break away from Star Wars or G.I. Joe to buy them. Playmobil to me was always like Brio train sets. They had huge presences in toy stores, but I never knew a kid that had either of them. So who could have predicted Playmobil would eventually get the license to make Ghostbusters toys 33 years later? In 2017, Playmobil launched an entire range of Ghostbusters toys based on the original Ghostbusters, Ghostbusters 2, and the real Ghostbusters. Up until this point, various companies had offered up the same 4 Ghostbusters over and over again in various scales and sculpts. Whether it was Diamond Select or Mattel, it was always just figures aimed at display collecting. Even now, Hasbro is pushing out several different sets of the same 4 characters with nothing to surround them with. Companies like Hasbro continue to claim that vehicles and playsets are not marketable. If that's true, how is it that Lego is one of the most successful toy companies in the 21st century, and Playmobil has managed to create an entire range of toys, complete with vehicles and a massive playset based on a movie from 1984? Playmobil's Ghostbusters line alone destroys Hasbro's arguments at point-blank range. And when I had the choice of Hasbro's Ghostbusters figures or the Playmobil line, there was no contest. I picked up everything in the line based on the original film. The reason I didn't pick up items from Ghostbusters 2 and the real Ghostbusters is simply because those had toys when the properties were originally released. Admittedly, the Ghostbusters 2 toys were wrapped into the real Ghostbusters line back in the Kenner days, but the Ecto-1A and the Slime Blower toys carried the Ghostbusters 2 logo on them. My interest was with Playmobil's offerings from the first film, because that was the big mistake back in 1984 in need of redemption. There are a few things from other entries in the series mixed into this grouping, but not many. Playmobil has provided Ghostbusters fans with the Firehouse, the Ecto-1, Slimer's Hot Dog Cart, the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, Zool, Egon vs. a Ghost, and a special 4-pack of the hero figures alone. Each of the sets come with specific figures, much like Lego sets. To get them all, you need all the sets. The Firehouse nets you Ray Stantz, Egon in his lab coat, Louis Tully as Vince Clortho, Keymaster of Gozer, the Librarian Ghost, and Janine Melnitz in her Ghostbusters 2 costume. The Ecto-1 comes with Winston Zeddemore and Janine Melnitz in full Ghostbusters equipment, which is something of a reference to the real Ghostbusters cartoon series. Slimer's Hot Dog Cart comes with Slimer and the poor guy who owns the portable business. The Stay Puft Marshmallow Man comes with Ray Stantz, this time covered in marshmallow and wearing his signature Ecto goggles. The Zool figure set comes with a slimed Peter Venkman, Dana Barrett as Zool, and a duo of terror dogs. I don't really get why they decided to slime him for this set. A clean version would have been fine, and even a marshmallow-covered version would have made sense, but not slimed. Egon vs. the Ghost is pretty self-explanatory. You get Egon in his equipment, and a fairly posh Spectre. The 4-pack of Ghostbusters gives you the heroes over again with a notable variation. This time Ray Stantz is wearing his Ecto goggles, but his uniform is clean as with the Firehouse. Unfortunately, Venkman is still slimed. This was a missed opportunity to give us a clean version of Venkman. The staff at Playmobil clearly have a love affair with the character of Ray Stantz. 3 distinct versions across 3 sets. Egon gets his 2 variants. Venkman and Winston are left with just 1 version each. Because of the way the figures are constructed, anyone with headgear has a permanent dent in their hair if the headpiece is removed. So Ray, Egon, and Louis have to keep their goggles, head lantern, and colander on their heads respectively, or else have permanent hat head. Another quirk worth mentioning is the lack of unique sculpting for some of the characters' hairstyles. Janine and Egon appear to have something in the ballpark for their hair, but Ray, Winston, and especially Venkman do not have their correct coiffures. I'm not sure why, given that even the recent Doc Brown in the Back to the Future Playmobil set has hair that harkens to his on-screen look. It's a weird miss. Every set comes with some rubbery ectoplasm splashes that you can stick on various parts of the playsets and vehicles. I left those in bags because I could visualize them getting covered in lint and dust and did not relish that thought. I have no proof to back up what I'm about to say, but it feels like Playmobil took a hard look at Kenner's Real Ghostbusters toy line, made a list of all of its shortcomings, and fixed them. As I stated in our Real Ghostbusters feature, the proton streams on the Real Ghostbusters figures from Kenner were horribly fragile, and they were not removable, making the situation even more frustrating. Playmobil has designed a far more durable attachment piece that simulates the proton stream at the end of the Neutrona wands on the packs, and they're easily removable so the Ghostbusters can store the wands on their packs when not in use. I do have some concerns about the use of rubber for the hoses that connect the wands to the proton packs, as well as the ghost traps to the activation pedals. Rubber dries up and rots after a few years. I don't foresee these holding up very long to nature and time. Overall, however, the equipment accessories are a massive upgrade from the Kenner versions. In the Kenner line, it wasn't until the Screaming Heroes line that landed in 1989, 3 years after the figure series was launched, that kids finally had a trap and a PKE meter for the figures to use. The trap, an inert solid brick of gray plastic, came with Screaming Heroes Venkman, while the PKE came with Screaming Heroes Egon. Later that year, Slimed Heroes Ray would have the first set of removable ecto goggles the figures could wear. The Playmobil line trounces the Kenner toys in this department. The traps come with most of the sets. They all have opening doors and a central plug to pop in a ghost in the midst of being captured. A rubber hose connects the trap to the activation pedal, which was missing on the Kenner accessory. The traps can be inserted into the containment unit in the Firehouse to store those ghosts, and the containment unit really resembles the machine from the first film in looks and function. Speaking of the Firehouse, there's a lot to say, and all of it is good. First, the Firehouse has 3 levels, and each level is accessible via a solid staircase. Logic finally makes a playset again, and it is good. The Kenner version not having stairs was a real annoyance. Also, the fire pole isn't the unreliable whirlybird ride of the Kenner playset, but a far more straightforward rail system for figures to grab and slide down to the ground floor. The containment unit fits into the Firehouse in its own space, unlike the Kenner version where you had this massive separate piece that didn't really go anywhere. Playmobil also wisely removed the roof from the Firehouse. On the Kenner original, the roof made access to the upper floors difficult. The third floor of the Playmobil version has been reserved for Janine's desk, which is a little odd given that her desk is traditionally at the back of the main garage level. Janine has a somewhat 90s looking computer, a lamp, and a newspaper filled with Ghostbusters related headlines. Part of me wants to get 4 Playmobil beds from other sets and put them up there instead, but then Janine's office would have nowhere to go because the second floor is dedicated to Egon's laboratory. You can tell Playmobil's love for the original film was in everything they included here. You get the monitor that hooked up to the head scanner, and yes, it shows a terror dog on the screen. You get a push cart for Egon's microscope and various beakers, and you also get another push cart for his readout printer that I assume gives him a chart of PKE scans or something. A bookcase holds some test tubes filled with ectoplasm, I imagine. There's a specimen bottle, and yes, Tobin's Spirit Guide. There are some kitchen pots and pans included despite the lack of a kitchen. The TV sits atop a toolbox with working trays. A video camera on a tripod is ready to film any paranormal subjects they decide to study. There's even a pizza in case Egon runs out of Twinkies. There's also a large glass container included, though I'm not sure what this is supposed to be. It's too large to be the popcorn jar from the first film. It might be a nod to the slime container in Ghostbusters 2, but I just don't know. There isn't a bathroom in the Firehouse, so maybe it's a chamber pot. A floor lamp, chair, and Egon's trusty PKE meter round out the lab. The inclusion of the library ghost is a little random, but one can assume she was captured at some point and put in the containment unit. So it's nice to have one of the original movie ghosts in Playmobil form, and Ray is on hand to capture her in the trap. The front door of the Firehouse is the one area where the original Kenner playset is arguably superior. The actual Firehouse in the film had large, barn-style front doors. The Kenner version simulated this rather respectably. Playmobil has oddly opted for a more modern roll-up door. Granted, the roll-up door is probably more durable in the long run, and it's a lot more fun to play with. But you quickly forgive the roll-up door when you realize the Playmobil Firehouse can do one major thing the Kenner version failed at. The Firehouse as a toy really has one job: house the Ecto-1. The Kenner version of the playset didn't provide enough room for the car to fit inside, nor did it make the door high enough for the vehicle to exit the Firehouse with the roof seat installed. All around, everything to do with accommodating the vehicle was a failure. Playmobil's Firehouse? Oh, the entire Ecto-1 fits inside with room to spare. It's an amazing playset, especially when you consider the toy landscape in 2020. As a symbol, it's a rebuke of everything Hasbro and Mattel claim isn't possible these days. The construction is super sturdy, the details are impeccable. Any complaints I have would be down to small preferences. I'd prefer a Janine from the first film. I wish the stairs didn't start right by the sidewalk, but these aren't fatal flaws, just my own nitpicks. Kenner's corner cutting with the real Ghostbusters line extended into the Ecto-1 itself. As I've previously mentioned, the vehicle could only hold 2 of the 4 Ghostbusters, with the rear section taken up with a grappling hook to catch a ghost. The vehicle cannot hold all of the heroes, and because the proton packs did not have removable proton streams, there was no way for the Ecto-1 to carry their equipment without running the risk of breaking their packs. The Playmobil Ecto-1 rights all of these wrongs. Instead of easily broken doors that force the figures inside awkwardly, the entire roof section lifts away to reveal an authentically configured interior to an actual 1959 Cadillac ambulance. 4 Ghostbusters can be seated inside the Ecto-1, and along the rear bulkhead of the driver's side is a rack to store 4 proton packs. It's the stuff an 80s kid's dreams are made of. Playmobil even provided a storage space for a ghost trap, and there's enough room left for the PKE meter and ecto goggles to travel in the trunk. The rear door opens upward, which I guess is better than the Kenner one opting to fall down like a drawbridge. Neither are correct to the side-hinged Cadillac door. Oh well. But I haven't even gotten to the best part yet. Playmobil engineered an authentic roof rack with all of the proper equipment adorning the top of the Ecto-1. And within the roof assembly is a battery pack for a few AAA batteries, so the Ecto can flash its siren lights and blare its signature siren sound. Guys, the Kenner one doesn't have anything on this. If their Firehouse wasn't enough to convince you, their Ecto-1 just left the Kenner toys in the dust. I can hear some of you saying, Michael, how come you're saying the modern Ecto here is better than the vintage one, but you didn't say the same of the modern Legacy Falcon versus the vintage one? Because it's all about playability. There was nothing about the vintage Millennium Falcon that prevented us from simulating the movie vehicle's capabilities. All of the heroes could fit inside, and a kid could pick it up and take off for new adventures. The Legacy Falcon is gorgeous, but it trades overall size and wow factor for practical usability within. Everything inside is somewhat scaled down. Where the vintage version could fit multiple figures in the secret compartment, the Legacy Falcon's hidden compartment is far smaller, and all of the doorways are shorter than the figures it is designed to carry. And a kid can't pick it up to play with it as a ship. It's a beautiful display representation of the movie vehicle, but it is not as versatile or usable as the vintage design. And the same can be said of the vintage Ecto-1. At a glance, it looks cool, but it is not terribly usable nor very durable, whereas the Playmobil Ecto-1 is infinitely more play-conscious and very well made. The Zool set and the Egon set are really just figure sets. The terror dogs in the Zool set are worth the price of admission. Well detailed and articulated, these would provide all kinds of fun during a ghost-busting adventure. And Dana Barrett looks great as a Playmobil figure. The Egon figure and Ghost is a nice set as well. This is where you get the glow-in-the-dark ghost that can be plugged into the ghost trap, as well as an accessory accessory of the Ghostbusters' now famous walkie-talkie. You get another of these in the 4-pack figure set. And while the ghost figure may seem random, we have never been told, to my knowledge, what ghost Egon captured in this moment from the original film. So make of that what you will. Last but certainly not least in the Playmobil Ghostbusters lineup is Gozer in the form of Mr. Stay Puft. We've had so many figures of Mr. Stay Puft over the years, it's easy to overlook this figure's importance in the history of Ghostbusters toys. What it boils down to here is scale. This is the first time a Stay Puft figure has been made available in a line with playsets and vehicles, and is also much bigger than the Ghostbusters themselves. The Kenner version was infamously tiny. Yes, Mattel did an exclusive 20-inch Stay Puft, but Mattel couldn't get an Ecto-1 off the ground, and certainly never made a playset. Playmobil has given us the first movie toys better than we could have hoped for. Barring Venkman's hair and slimed coveralls, I don't have any complaints. Some people might think the generic Playmobil figure faces aren't ideal, but how are these any different from Lego minifigures in that respect? Honestly, if this line had come out just like this in 1984, I wouldn't have hesitated. Seeing the Firehouse with the Ecto-1 flashing its sirens and all of the Ghostbusters battling Zool and Stay Puft and the full roaming Vapor and the Terror Dogs with Louis Tully in full-on Vince Clortho mode, it instantly pulls me back to that rainy day in 1984 when my father took my brother and I to see Ghostbusters. My father so rarely took us to the movies. It was usually our mother, and even then Dad wasn't often with us. But this time he did, and after we got home, I ran out into the gray drizzle of the day and played Ghostbusters in the backyard, the Ray Parker Jr. song still in my head. Playmobil has put all of that 1984 experience together in a way no other toy company has achieved. The most accurate face sculpts and best articulation in the world are no substitute for a fully realized play environment with everything essential finally at a kid's fingertips. When it comes to Ghostbusters toys, I know who I'm gonna call. Playmobil. Oh wow! I can't wait to tell Jennifer I got to see the Ghostbusters Firehouse while I was visiting New York City. Oh, there's something you don't see every day. Marty! You gotta come back with me! Where? Back to the future! Why, Doc? Because, Marty, after graduation, Jennifer dumps you and eventually falls into a life of crime, and you end up as a nameless bank clerk. But one day she comes into the bank, Marty, and you don't recognize her. Get in the car, Marty. We have to go. Your very future is at stake. Hope you enjoyed that, everyone. If you want to see what happens to Marty, click here. And if you just want to watch more Ghostbusters content, you can watch our Ghostbusters playlist here. I am gonna go get a long overdue haircut, so I'll see you guys later.